welcome to Proactive and Prepared Food Safety Trends, Issues, and Action Responses. My name is Suzanne, and I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. If you experience technical difficulties during the WebEx session, please dial 1-866-779-3239. Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience. However, due to privacy rights, we've chosen not to display the number or list of attendees to everyone on the call today. As for today's call is being recorded. Time permitting, we will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's presentation. You may ask an online question anytime throughout the presentation today by simply typing your question into the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a question into the text field and click Send. Please hit the Send to defaulted to all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I'd like to introduce your first speaker for today, Ruth P. Tran, Vice President of Food Safety and Public Health at Ecolab. Ruth, you now have the floor.
Suzanne, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. We're pleased to present our first webinar for 2018, and you'll hear more about our upcoming webinars at the end. Pleased to be here with my colleague, Mandy Sedlak, who manages food safety and public health within our EcoSure division, and she will speak in a little bit. And I really echo Suzanne's comment at the top of the hour related to submitting questions. We are eager to hear these, so please feel free to type these into the Q&A box as was indicated, and we'll get to those at the end. So let's kick this off. First of all, we're very pleased you're joining Ecolab in this webinar, and just to highlight that among our 4 purposes, the idea of safe food is very important to Ecolab, and happy to partner with customers to help promote this. The reality is that there are some foodborne illness concerns in the world today that we all need to be aware of. They all play a role in helping to solve these. I like to start with this slide to kick things off, because certainly in our social media world today, there's a lot of concerns that we need to be aware of, and I think this slide is always interesting to pull. I have checked, and there is not a similar one for 2018 yet, although there will be soon, and numbers will get even bigger. But I think it's just overwhelming to think about the fact that in 1 minute on the internet, it's estimated there's 3.5 million Google searches, 56 emails sent, and tweets. And so I personally contribute to a lot of that, I'll do. But I think we need to keep in mind and think about how this can impact food safety as well. The reality is that consumers are looking for a lot of information today. These are a listing of some we follow within the global food and beverage space. And we're hearing that consumers want more simple foods that are locally sourced. They expect that manufacturing systems will address all kinds of things, and they want to know about what's going on, often through many of these inner channels. Is that we're seeing that science and technology can enable much broader process improvements, such as better enhancement of when they're out there. This also leads to driving publicity of these adverse events, in that the bad news travels fast, certainly does occur. We are seeing some newer foods that are being implicated in issues, somewhat a blurred definition of what's ready to eat versus not. Public health benefits from gathering all this information, but industry, including down to the food service level, needs to be ready to manage the risks that might be highlighted, but to retain focus on the basics. In the food manufacturing world, this is the ideas of good manufacturing practices. So we need to keep these in mind and ready to collaborate, because these certainly impact what goes on within the service venue as well. But what about what's going on in food service? There's a nice report that's collected each year that talks about some of these trends, and overall we're seeing a lot of emphasis on different things around the world. For example, the western part of the world has a lot more stress on menu and variety of foods, whereas the eastern countries tend to look at more focus on health and being natural. Through is this consumer expectation of transparency and reliance on technology as well, especially in the Middle East and Asian countries. But this idea of the think global and cook local is certainly evidence as we're all able to travel more and experience different kinds of foods around the world, but we will be able to eat them at home as well. Service restaurant growth, point out we're seeing a lot in Asia and the Middle East, and especially in the quick serve restaurant categories and fast casuals. It's interesting to look at what kinds of restaurants are seeing a lot of growth, and coffee shops really lead the pack, followed by pizza and chicken, and sandwiches and burgers round up the top list. We're seeing a lot of trends in how people are obtaining their foods, with delivery gaining in prominence, especially in Asia. And how people order their food is changing as well, as online being very significant, especially in Asia. We Americans tend to order a lot by phone, and in Europe and Australia mainly by going into restaurants and physically ordering. But window cooking and having access to directly see into how food is being prepared is having an impact as well. So the realities of these shifting dining preferences do need to impact how food service operators are addressing the food safety concerns that may exist as well. And on food delivery for a little bit, this chart, which was published recently, indicates from a global perspective where we're seeing growth in delivery or delivered food, and specifically look at the lighter green bars and where we're seeing the heights of those. Certainly there's some in the U.S., but generally people are intending to order with the same frequency. Geographies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, again, the Middle Eastern region, we're seeing that delivery really gaining in prominence. Australia. But the fact is interesting as well, and this was published in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year, which focused in this case on one particular delivery customer and showed that while interest tends to be a drawing of this interest over time, perhaps as people elect to jump to a different kind of company, and I don't want this to be reflecting on this one company, but I think it's just interesting in that there's a lot of options available to us, and perhaps we're still in the trying out a lot of different things mode, which does, I think, have impacts on food safety as well. Asked often is a question of, is the food supply less safe? And I always answer no, because I think the reality is all of the nodes across the food supply chain are doing a terrific job of really, one, preparing terrific foods out there, but also making sure that it's safe. The challenge is that these incidents are much more visible today as we have better detection capabilities and all that help identify these broad issues, which from one end is good news from a public health standpoint, in that we can know where the problems are and take actions, but it really does emphasize the need for just flawless execution of food safety programs across this whole supply chain, which can be daunting. So we need to make sure that we are focusing our efforts appropriately and having facts in hand, so I'll talk about in just a second here, can really help direct these. So what are some of these facts and figures that I think are important to be aware of? Well, honestly, the first is just the magnitude of the foodborne disease issue around the world. And a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization did a large survey globally and concluded that each year around the world, about 1 person in 10 becomes sick because of foodborne illness. Also that there's more than 400,000 deaths each year attributed to foodborne illness, and that children for the greatest majority. So to this a little bit more, their study estimated the global burden of diseases from 31 different kinds of agents, including bacteria, toxins, and chemicals. And the highest disease burden was seen in Africa and East Asia. I thought it was curious that while we saw some variability in what causes illness around the world, there were some remarkable similarities. Any of you who've been in the industry for a while, certainly things like norovirus and Campylobacter, E. coli, and Salmonella should be no strangers to us. And we saw that in evidence around the world as top causes of foodborne illness. In the world, that's Africa and Southeast Asia. Also had issues from chemicals, things like aflatoxin and dioxins, which might be more endemic to those parts of the world. And then certainly we can track what causes deaths, and we see that Salmonella leads the pack there. Now, I know and I realize that most of us are not sitting in these other countries. I think it's important to keep aware of this information because we may be sourcing products or ingredients that come from the interesting countries around the world that offer a variety of offerings to us. Into this a little bit more, and I realize there's a lot of information here, but the takeaway is here's the Africa data and here's the Southeast Asia data. So that yes, we do see the greatest disease burden here. U.S. is considered within this Americas group, Europe, China's over here, and the Middle East are these. So just in general, we can see that the developed world has less overall illness. If we just look at the colors of the bar, here we see norovirus, Campylobacter, E. coli, and Salmonella, though again, those top causes of illness, pretty well represented across the world, out that these are top causes. A lot of data in this report, and if anybody's interested, we can send you links to it. But it certainly does bring up a few different implications. One is that there's a difference in disease burden between the regions, suggesting to me that many of these diseases are really preventable by our current methods. And we need to link this to economic development and making sure that the right food safety systems are in place. We need to be able to move from these reactive systems to more preventive type of systems and enable surveillance so that we can help track progress. Also need to think about the fact that pathogens, problems in the developed world, may need some novel control methods. And we see this in data like these, which represent the top U.S. report outbreaks, the most recent data from the CDC. In general, just look at the fact that these lines have stayed pretty flat, at least for the last year or more of time. We do see that norovirus peaked, and that's the darkish blue line on the graph, but has been flat for the last several years. You see back in the 90s, that gray line that's the top, a lot of unknown causes. We've gotten better at identifying illnesses, which is evidence of the new technologies today. Guess is that probably back in the 90s, that was norovirus that we just couldn't detect at the time. But same data reflected as was in the World Health Organization data with norovirus, Salmonella, Clostridium perfringens, and the others reflected here and generally staying flat. Novel methods to think about. But we look at what kinds of foods do we need to focus on. NC also publishes these data periodically. This is the most current that we have. See the impact of kinds of foods causing illness, frankly. Reasons for this, I think, one, we're eating more fish today because there are reasons to do that. But also we're increasingly sourcing seafood from further and further away and have a lot more choice in our diets today. It's very crucial that it be properly temperature controlled right after catch to avoid production of things like seafood toxins that can cause illness. The issues with the protein products here, chicken and beef and so on, causing issues that we need to be aware of, as well as produce. More slides of facts and figures here, and one is that the data in the U.S. predominate with directing illnesses or telling us that illnesses are more likely to occur in food service venues. Knowledge that certainly this is based on reporting and consumers reporting who may have a tendency to blame the last place they ate at, which may have been a food service venue. There's no way to always confirm these data, so we need to keep that in mind. But regardless, there are implications for the food service industry to really step up and make sure that the right practices are in place. This last slide of data that we have, but this is a composite of so-called contributing factors to foreign illness when we know these and presenting a global view where we can. And these divided into about 5 different areas is concerns from poor personal hygiene, improper holding, contamination from equipment, inadequate cooking, all playing a role in foodborne illness. So the areas that I think we need to be focused in on and focus on through the rest of this presentation. I'm going to turn then over to my colleague Mandy, who will talk about reducing risk and protecting your operations and really the nuts and bolts of applying this information to daily actions.
So how do we reduce the risk and protect our operations? We go with the 4 components of a strong food safety program, and these 4 principles are important as we look in our operations for this program. In category, we start with clean environments. Handling can reduce the number of foodborne illness. Handling consistency is a key and reduce the number of the importance in day-to-day operations. It's estimated that washing hands with soap and water could reduce diarrheal disease-associated deaths by 50%. This also states that the person in charge of a food establishment is accountable for developing, carrying out, and enforcing procedures aimed at preventing foodborne illness. Safe food, take it for granted. Some deliveries, cooking and cooling procedures, as well as food storage must be in place. The CDC estimates 78% of all foodborne illnesses originate in the kitchen. Foodborne outbreaks can occur as a result of unclean environments. A 7-month outbreak investigation back in 2015 occurred in a restaurant environment. Isolates from the restaurant drains and kitchen surfaces matched the outbreak profile. Typhi was eventually linked to the building drainage system. So if we look at that, our systems need to be changing and address both current and emerging pathogens beyond knowledge from the past and the future. Hand washing is a top priority. We need to make it a priority and wash our hands when needed. Also, leading example. The research shows us that the barriers we must remove for convenient and consistent hand washing. So if we look above at those barriers, we see that some of them are the connection between hand hygiene and foodborne illness, just they're not understood. People are too busy, and wearing gloves may create a false sense of security. Assessing risk and how to reduce it is very important. Cooking and cooling must be done properly, managed. 2 unrelated outbreaks in the states of Virginia and Ohio set a precedence for the importance of excellent food safety practices to the growth of Clostridium perfringens Outbreaks affected over 271 people. The improper cooling, reheating, and hot holding are beef. So obviously these happened on St. Patrick's Day. We also look at the 2017 Food Code, actually added descriptions that the person in charge routinely monitor food temperatures during hot and cold holding. When we look at visibility and compliance, proactive habits combined with corrective action really can reduce the risk of foodborne illness outbreaks. If we use this information properly, we can improve food safety and guest experiences. So we will look at an example on the next slide, but we found is that what you focus on is key to improvement. With an EcoSure track helps from results and leverage them with industry trends to demonstrate how it works. So this example, we have this EcoSure Health Department data, so this is how we used it. In this example, we used products and innovation. We established procedures and increased training in a group of restaurants to actually reduce food safety risks. So why did we implement these systems? Violations on a group of restaurants compared with the industry notice the likelihood of repeat violations. For example, if we look at the chart, we identified on health department data that restaurants were cited 26% of the time for hand washing. And we just spoke about the priority of hand washing and preventing disease. 17% of the industry was cited in this area. So using this information, we know that they're 1.5 more likely to have repeat violations. So putting active action in place and leveraging this health department data can lead to improvements in food safety and guest experiences. Awareness. We do have examples how you can practically use training materials within the restaurant. We have videos that can be taken on site and effective if they're used properly, room settings, and then active participation through hands-on activities. Remember that training is not just for onboarding, but a good refresher for the employees who are still working in the restaurant. We have a lot of education materials that we can use for food retail employees. They have an oral culture learner project, and I found out that people relate well to stories being told. So this next slide is a little tough to look at, and it was actually hard for me to pull this into the presentation. Because when I look at it, the result had a preventable conclusion. We follow along visual training. Unfortunately, we see a food worker getting sick. And then we move forward, and he proceeds to use his hands and cut ready-to-eat food. And we see the young girl being served this contaminated food, and in the end, she gets sick. This case that the ill worker was the cause. We do have access to these posters and storyboards from the FDA. They're going to enhance food safety training efforts at the retail level, letting employees understand the important role they play in protecting public health. Available in 9 different languages, including Arabic, Simplified Chinese, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So practical solutions for operations. All in all, we find that there are many ways to train properly and convey the importance of food safety from farm to fork. Would you like to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Mandy. That was a great selection of some real practical kinds of advice, and we can certainly get into more of that with all of you in the question section a bit. But really, we need to think about the food safety solutions, and I think of food safety as being equivalent to behaviors. And really, interventions need to be in place at multiple sites on the food supply chain, from farm through processing into food service and food retail, where food is handled, prepared, and served, so that ultimately consumers are safe at the end of the day. We printed a lot of data, facts, and figures, and some practical examples It really gets down to these recommendations. That is, thinking like what the hazard might be, but making sure to assess risks within the particular situation that you're in. What foods are you serving? What behaviors might exist? There are issues with various training that needs to be enhanced, for example. There as well of the potential sources of contamination, how organisms or agents might be transmitted, and certainly keeping up to date on the science as well. And then in place, preventive controls that will address these risks. Enforcing and reinforcing these practices and procedures with staff are important, and then verifying that these are put in place is really key. I can't speak enough about staying connected and building connections with others, with health department officials, and really making an investment in food safety, which may involve some new tools and technology, maybe new approaches, et cetera. But at the end of the day, being persistent is really key, and underestimating the positive effect of why the food safety practices are so imperative can go a long way in influencing behavior change. That, we are happy to take any questions that might have been submitted. Again, we have this Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen into which questions can be typed. So we're eager to get these. My colleague Karen is also on the line, and she will be helping to facilitate this question and answer session.
Thank you, Ruth. We have had quite a few questions come in, so I'll just start going through them. I'll start with one that was actually pre-submitted before the seminar. The question was, as our floor cleaner now has sanitizer in the solution, we have to continue to hang up wet mops, or since sanitizer in the solution, can we leave the wet mop in the solution?
So operations standpoint with this, we would say and encourage to continue to hang the mops up to air dry. The reasoning behind it would be if you were to store them in sanitizer, the sanitizer would eventually lose its strength and no longer work and sanitize the mop.
Great. Thank you, Karen. What else do we have?
Well, almost like a follow-up to that, too, is what are some of the best practices to clean and maintain a floor drain?
Again, operationally, that's an operations question. There are many ways. I think the best way would be actually remove, which is difficult sometimes, to remove the top of the drain and use tools to frequently. The hurdles on that are to make sure that the drain is accessible, and a lot of that goes into when you're building or placing tables in the beginning of the opening of the restaurant, and you want to make sure that you have the right tools to drain off, and sometimes you can lose the material on the screw to put it back on, as they can be trip hazards. The best way would be to actually remove it and clean it out.
I think too that the awareness, as Mandy mentioned, there was an outbreak that has now been linked to salmonella, which was hanging out in a drain for quite a while, and through some of these newer detection technologies, the workers were able to link the isolate that was buried in that drain to actual illness isolates from people who got sick, which really does indicate that attention needs to be focused on things like drain, because they can be a great reservoir of potential hazards like a salmonella.
Just another question, kind of following up on the whole theme of floor here, is should the wiping cloth be left in sanitizers?
What's in the restaurant should be in the sanitizer when they're not in use. So we want to make sure that keep, again, their strength and using them and placing them back in the sanitizer is the best way to store it. And of course, make sure that the sanitizer bucket is checked often and stays within strength so it is effective when you put towel back into the bucket.
Anticipate over time, so that is important.
Another question, and we'll see if it can help out here, is that what might be a reason for having irritated skin due to frequent washing? I know we talked a lot about hand washing and the importance of that for food safety. This is a question that comes up quite a bit, is getting that irritated skin. What are your recommendations for that? Is there any particular solution or other habits or procedures that businesses and operations should be mindful of?
Yeah, that's a interesting one, and with Mandy and I both located in the northern U.S. in cold and always dry winter. From a humidity standpoint, dry skin on hands is kind of inevitable, which can lead to irritation if that skin is, which probably a little bit drier than normal this time of year, is constantly immersed in water and some of the soaps and sanitizers that might be used. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about the weather, much as we would like to. But I do think, considering the selection of the hand care products to those which, one, are certainly effective at doing what we expect them to do, that is strong, good detergents that will effectively remove soil, and the use of antibacterial hand soaps where indicated to help reduce risks that can be transmitted by hands. But looking for formulations that include moisturizers that can deliver effective washing and sanitizing, but also give the added benefit of moisturizing the inevitable dry skin that we see. It is very important that hands are washed appropriately and as frequently as are needed to manage the food safety risks. Certainly, use of gloves can be a way to help with this, but use of gloves really doesn't replace the need for hand washing, but it may help in perhaps sensitive individuals to better manage some of the irritation that can.
On the hand washing theme, we actually get this question. We had this question last fall when we had our hand hygiene webinar, and it was the use of hand sanitizer. Is that as good as hand washing, or is it better? How does using hand sanitizers fit into the whole picture of food safety and keeping the practices?
And a couple things to think about. One of the reasons we wash hands is to remove food soils. And in order to do that effectively, a soap with detergent capabilities that will, strip off that soil is really important to be done. And that's partly why the FDA has, in several areas in the food code, for example, that use of hand sanitizers is not a substitute for physical washing of hands, because in addition to using a soap product that will remove that soil, there's expectation of mechanical action, that's rubbing hands together to help further remove that soil from that. That's really important and something that a hand sanitizer just doesn't offer. The other thing is that per the food code, and you all be aware of this, that there are certain kinds of hand sanitizers that are permitted to be used, and the food code lays out specific parts of the various regulations where that list of approved types of formations of hand sanitizers is. Some are acceptable to be used, some are not, without a rinse following their use. So it's very important that if a hand sanitizer is incorporated into a hand hygiene program in a restaurant, that the formulation is well known and that appropriate actions and behaviors be incorporated around it to ensure that it's not inappropriately used. So, bottom line, hand sanitizers may have a role, but they need to be incorporated within that hand hygiene program and really consider removal of soil from the hands is very important as well.
Another question regarding hand hygiene. What about washing our hands with our gloves on? What's the recommendation in terms of just washing our hands with the gloves or switching out our gloves? Just kind of if you could provide some information about the overview of gloves in the food safety program.
Keep in mind that the reason we sometimes use gloves in a is to protect the people that we are serving food to. It's not, and I know I fall into this, that I think it's protecting me from, the soil in the restaurant or from contaminating myself. And while there's certainly some truth to that, really the bigger value is in protecting others that we are serving food to. So food code does lay out various criteria related to hand washing and glove use, one of which is that when there is a glove change because of changing tasks and so on, that hand washing needs to be incorporated. If you might have some practical comments related to glove use that you've seen.
Yeah, I agree that the food code does point out how and when to wash your hands. Make it practical in the restaurant. Training. It takes a lot of the whys of why we wash our hands and why we wear gloves. And some ways to make sure that people do wash their hands be to make sure, obviously, that there are always gloves available, but want to make sure that they're nearby and they're not in a location that makes it really easy to just change gloves without washing your hands in between uses. So a good way to do that is put the glove locations right by the sink, the holders. Don't encourage anyone to place the glove boxes anywhere in production or near the dish area if there's not a hand sink nearby. Make it convenient and make it remove the barrier from being able to do what is right.
Let's shift a little bit from hand hygiene into one of the elements of any good, strong food safety program, which is training and awareness. And question that came in about, some of the biggest challenges in the food industry is training and the retention of what people learn. And in particular with some of the current millennial-weighted workforce, but also say kind of the diversity in our workforce, multiple cultures, multiple languages. And so seeing as being the most efficient and effective in terms of training and helping people retain the training that they've used.
I think the first part of being efficient and effective is knowing that there has to be different ways of training. It's difficult to justify one way, such as a classroom versus visual versus person training, when everybody learns differently. So you may reach one set of the audience, you'll be able to reach them all unless you use different ways of training within operations. The other part about training is, as we mentioned in the presentation, it's hard to realize that you have to have ongoing training. There's turnover, and that means that you have a lot of training and onboarding. There are ever-changing systems and ever-changing ways that food safety occurs, and have fresheners training for the current employees and managers. So it can lead by example is very important within the restaurant. For that?
Yeah, I've seen locations where there's a set training done, all the time. Think about teachable moments that might be observed, both the correcting poor behaviors when they might be seen, as well as praising up, correct behaviors when they're being done. And this is really reliant on the manager and person in charge being aware of what's going on, being very present. Also, incorporating things like little short bursts of training, perhaps at shift sign-in. And I've seen one particular restaurant where they had an automated kind of iPad-based time that people would sign into. But also, as they were signing in, you know, within reason, and so that it didn't slow things down too much, but that provided a quick little 20-second kind of burst recording of, hey, here's something to keep in mind as you do your job today, and would focus on a different kind of behavior. Recording, and in this case, it was, you know, informally done by the headquarters QA folks at this particular restaurant company, on just these reminders that at top of mind as people were signing in, they were given this reminder of something to do.
Another question a bit about washing. You know, I know we've seen this a lot as people need to hand polish or kind of do some touch-up on warewashing of cutlery and glasses after they come out of the dishwasher. Is that what you would recommend, or what might be a better practice in terms of a food safety after something's come out of a dishwasher and there's been sanitized and rinsed at that point?
Well, I think one is making sure that the warewash machines, which I will admit I'm not an expert in, but I know people who are, so I've absorbed some knowledge from them, but making sure that machine is set up to operate properly. You know, properly functioning ware machines that includes something like a rinse aid will help to sheet away any remaining droplets and so on, so that polishing of wares should not need to be routinely done if that machine is working properly, and also that the wares have been dried appropriately, either through, you know, drying, or they're coming out of the machine at a high enough temperature that essentially they, you know, dry as soon as they come out. So if there's significant need for hand polishing to be done to remove water spots and all, it might signal that there's an issue with the machine which needs some care and attention.
Okay. Recommend to sanitize food contact surfaces. They've used quad, but it can take up to 15 minutes to work. Do you have any other recommendations to sanitize a food contact surface besides sanitizer?
Well, certainly there's a variety of other kinds of sanitizers out there. I think what's key is following the labeled directions, and I'm surprised that they've only been able to find 15-minute efficacy times, because I'm more familiar with ones that have much shorter times than that. But regardless, I would say, you know, contacting your or sanitizer providing company to ask for advice like that. Do you have other ideas there?
Well, if it's first with the chemical and the sanitizer, exactly what you want to kill or take care of with the sanitizer. So if it's in front of the house or in the kitchen, use the right chemical, which related to reading the bill, reading the labels, and making sure that you're following it properly. There are practices. I know that we have chemicals that do kill within a lower amount of time than 15 minutes. But if you are in that position and it needs to sit and you're following the label, things you can do, like in restrooms, for example, you could spray one entire restroom with the sanitizer or the chemical that you're using, go into the restroom, do the same thing, and then by the time you come back, that sanitizer would have done exactly what it's supposed to do. So different practical steps in that area, and most certainly looking for one that fits within your operation would be key and the best practice.
For example, some peroxide-based products that are out there today, maybe sort of the next generation sanitizers and more in development that could be for something that might give you a shorter contact time requirement.
I think, Mandy, you touched on this a little bit when we talked about the training and awareness, but what recommended steps, really some real practical tips for a manager or or someone who's in a leadership position within a food service operations to talk their talk. How can they get out through the facility? What should they be looking for? What are some real, just real tangible things that a food service manager can do to help lead by example?
You said the perfect thing within the question, and that would be to lead by example. So more certainly, the manager or the person in leadership needs to know that they stay current, that they're consistently keeping up with the trends, and also educating people the correct way, knowing the correct answers and the whys behind what's happening. And you need all different types of training, but they relate more to the whys. Why is something happening? Why do I need to do this? So if a person in leadership can really lead by example, know the whys behind it, and speak to that, you'll buy in from the people that are in operations, and not only that, but they'll learn something in the meantime.
I might give a shameless plug, frankly, for this webinar right here. We will share with you in a little bit that this is being recorded and will be made available to all of you who have tuned in. And it might be worthwhile to pass it along or to highlight the fact that this was done to colleagues and so on, to help them just learn more. And there's certainly a lot more information that can be provided if there's specific needs. So I think bringing awareness is really key in making sure people are attuned to the information they need to do or need to be aware of, and then obviously applying that in very real walk the talk sort of ways.
I'm going to kind of go to a little bit of the scenarios of top challenges when dealing with regulatory during a foodborne illness outbreak. This never happens to any of our participants, but if it does, what are some recommendations that you have for them in dealing with regulatory during a foodborne incident, or the first action steps they should take to mitigate those results?
Steps that you would take actually happen before an outbreak. So in your time working with regulatory, a partnership is key. Know when to contact them, to contact someone in that position, and also following up and corrective action with everything that they are suggesting in the restaurant to help avoid an outbreak. But if an outbreak is inevitable and it happens, the first thing would be to understand what's going on with the outbreak and then reach out to your health department. It's so important that you know the local, state, and the federal regulatory requirements. They may vary among jurisdictions, but you maintain a good relationship with organizations. It can help implement best practices and then mitigate risks that will lead to the incident. But most importantly, just having that relationship and being able to contact as somebody so that you know what the next steps are and you know what to do, because ultimately we all have the same goal. We want to ensure that we are protecting our guests, ourselves, and the public health.
I have one comment that came in that I'm going to actually kind of put as a question too, is that, anytime you get your employees involved in the process, you get more buy-in. So what are some of the best ways to ensure that food service employees report food symptoms or might expect things could be contaminated or other food type, food safety related issues? How can we help engage those employees?
It starts with a culture of food safety and the understanding that there will be no penalty, for example, for calling in ill. You want to make sure that people in leadership are open and approachable. Somebody is ill or they're feeling ill, they're able to leave, and that everyone in leadership understands that ultimately someone coming ill is not even close to if someone came in ill and made people sick. So we definitely want them to stay home and have a culture where people feel comfortable, and a culture where the managers are open is very important. And you're following regulatory rules, if you will. I want to say rules because we want everyone to follow because it's the best thing to do. But realistically, the reason why those practices now in food code requiring proper cleanup after somebody gets ill with an EPA registered product, because we also know that guests can come in ill, but setting that standard that guests may come in ill, but we cannot increase our risk by having an employee come in ill to work.
Okay. Well, that's like it's all the time we have for questions today. Ruth, you want to advance to the next slide? We can have some closing remarks here. We have had a couple questions about, can we get the slides? Will the presentation be available? And it is, as Ruth had mentioned earlier, this presentation will be available on the ecolab.com website after March 30th. Go to the link that's listed there, and you can also see this webinar as well as other previous webinars. We've also had some questions about CEU credits, and so yes, those are available. At the end of this webinar, there will be a survey that comes out, and there's a box you can click saying you would like CEU credits, and we can get those passed on to you as well. So that will be coming. Our next food safety webinar will be in June. The topic we are working on right now is within our pest control and pest elimination. So that will be in June, and you can watch your inbox for more webinar details. We'll have that email out and with all the details probably soon after Memorial Day. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to speaking with you at our next webinar. And if you have other comments or other questions, you can email this email address here, webinars@ecolab.com. And I am actually the person who would be monitoring that email box and will respond to you as quickly as I can. Again, thank you to Ruth and Mandy for facilitating and leading our session today, and thank you all for attending. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. That does conclude our event. You may now disconnect your lines. Presenters, please hold.